So you got the podcast interview, but is it the one you really wanted? The one that will drive results? You see, too many experts just show up for the interview and it goes nowhere. No leads, no traction, no ROI. Why? Because they didn't get the interview they wanted. They just got the one that was offered. In this episode, I'm joined by Liz Brooks, one of our senior client account managers here at Interview Valet. And we're going to show you how to flip the script and make sure you always get the interview that you want, from targeting the right shows to setting the tone before the mic goes live. We're talking strategy, not just scheduling. This isn't about begging for airtime. It's about owning your message, knowing your audience, and guiding the conversation to align with your business goals. If you ever walked away from an interview thinking, oh man, I wish we would have talked about this, then this episode is for you. Stick around. This could be the difference between another podcast appearance and your next ideal client. You get the podcast interview, but was it the interview that you wanted? Today, Liz Brooks and I, one of our senior client account managers, are going to be talking about this, about what you can do to make sure you get the interview that you want, not just that the host wants. Liz, how are you doing today?
Hi, Tom. We have to stop running into each other like this.
Well, these are conversations that we have amongst ourselves as we share best practices, but also with our clients too, right? And so it's like, start with the end in mind. Nobody wants to be on a podcast, right? They want the results from being on a podcast. And that starts with having the right interview, not just a generic interview.
Exactly. And that's kind of twofold, right? Isn't it, Tom? It's about finding, first of all, the right show, the right platform to have said interview. And then once you have that down, you actually want to be able to deliver and get, say your message and get the results that you want. So it's almost a two-step process.
Yeah. And it's like that goal of what you want out of the podcast, because the vast majority of the world doesn't care about it, right? You've got to find those ones where there's that alignment with your message, your market.
Exactly. And that's how we start every single campaign with our clients, right? We identify what their target audience is. We use the tools that we have at our disposal to see who's visiting their website, where are they hanging out, and what shows are they listening to. And so many of our clients always think, the biggest show, the biggest platform is going to be the best interview. But we know that's not true, Tom. We always say bigger is not better, better is better. An example that I like to use, I'm a musician on the side. I could play a farmer's market downtown, and that would be a great gig. I'll make some money. I'll probably have exposure to 2 to 3K people, throughout the day, but I'm just background noise to them. They're there for the fruits and the vegetables, and I'm just kind of like on the side. They're not going to come to my next show or follow me online or buy the music. However, a small show, perhaps at a small dingy nightclub on a Tuesday or Wednesday night, not as fun to play. I may not make as much money in that moment, but the people who are there, they are there for the love of the music, right? They're probably going to come to the next show. And so it's the same with podcasts. You're not going to necessarily get the results that you want by being on the biggest show. You need to find where your people are. And oftentimes that's going to be a more niche market or vertical, right? But you're going to shoot more fish in a barrel than in the open sea, essentially, if you find the right show with your specific target audience.
Yeah. And sometimes, we always ask that question, who do you want to talk with? And I hear people say, well, I want to talk with Joe Rogan and Brene Brown. And I'm like, hold it. This is not Make-A-Wish, right? The question is not what podcast host do you want to talk with? This is what audience do you want to talk with, right? Don't start with the podcast name. Start with the audience and start backing into that. Like you said, there are databases out there now that we license that we can tell you, yeah, everybody that listens to this podcast, here's what other podcasts they listen to, or everyone that goes to this conference, right? If you want to talk to accountants, there's probably some big accounting conference, and you can use the data to say everyone that goes to this conference, here's what podcasts they listen to.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, it's about reaching the listeners, right? You mentioned Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's not going to attend your webinar or buy your book, but you want to reach the listeners. They're the ones that are going to ultimately show those conversions.
Yeah, I don't know that I want to be 3 hours recorded forever with a comedian, right? Be careful what you wish for with Joe Rogan. The other one too is like, all right, so you got on the podcast, your dream podcast. What do you want to talk about, right? Too often, I think people are just like, well, I say people, guests and agencies are like, oh, we just got you on this podcast. Well, that's great. For what reason, right? Where are we going with this? What's the goal of the host? And does it align with the goal of the audience and the guest?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, once you have the invitation, right? Once you have that in your pocket, you want to figure out what is going to be your main takeaway. And, you're probably really excited. You probably have all of these things that you want to talk about, list of like 10 different topics or speaking points, but ultimately you want to choose one flagship topic, right? Your main takeaway that you want to get across to the listeners and focus on that. You're going to talk about more than just that, of course, but everything else should complement that subject, and almost think of it like a story arc, right? You want to present a pain point. You want to present a problem that's going to be solved by the end of the episode, and why listeners need to listen to you specifically to solve said problem, right, Tom?
Yeah, it's like, don't try putting 4 movies into one, right? It just confuses the audience, and make sure you know what the topic is. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about some people that got invited to be on a Bloomberg article on podcasting, right? I'm sure when they got invited to that, they were probably like, oh, this will be great. Then when they got quoted and they realized the FTC was on there also on why payola and pay-per-play in podcasting violates the FTC rules, I think the people that are quoted in that article are going to regret the day they ever accepted that interview.
All right. And that's also in writing too. So that's forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that you definitely want to do is to show up prepared to your interview. You want to know what you're walking into. You want to, we talked about having your flagship topic, your main takeaway that you want, listeners to get from the conversation, but you want to have more than that. You want to have your calls to action. We always say that 3 is the sweet number, right? A small yes, a medium yes, a heck yes. You want to know what those are. We also always suggest having a dedicated welcome page, a landing site for listeners too. So it's important to show up, knowing what you want to talk about, knowing what those CTAs are, knowing where you're going to direct listeners, and then also connecting with the host ahead of the interview, so that they know what these CTAs are, so that you can discuss, what direction the conversation is going to take. You don't want it to be overly rehearsed. You don't want to have, a talk track like you're reading from a script or anything, but you want to be able to connect with the host and to be prepared. And that's why we do that here, right? For our clients, like a week in advance, we send that intro, we send that welcome page, and that's a chance for the guests to connect with the host, ahead of even hopping on the call link. And as we know, there's always a good 5 to 10 minutes of green room time, if you will, before hitting record, where you can really nail down what those takeaways are going to be.
Yeah. And I think of the examples we've had. We do all the prep beforehand, right? To talk to you about what the podcast is with the host, try to nail down those topics. But as a guest, you want to make sure that you use that, as you call it, green room time, that 5 minutes before you record, right? Where you talk a little bit, you answer questions, you set the sound levels to make sure that both parties know where they're going with this, right? I remember years ago talking with somebody that came to us, and they complained about that they never got the interviews that they wanted. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, I'm trying to promote my book. And the last podcast I was on, the host never asked me about my book. And I'm like, well, what did you do to help them, right? Did you send them a copy of your book? Did you give a summary of the book? Did you even mention the book before they hit record. And he's like, well, no, that's not my responsibility. That's the host's responsibility. And I'm like, if both people take responsibility for it, it will get done. Right. So before they hit record, one of the things I love to say is, like, Liz, if I was on your podcast, I guarantee I'd say something like, Liz, I'm so happy to be here. I want to bring as much value as I can. Where are you hoping to go with this? What are you hoping to get out of this? And seeing what they have in mind, make them put a flag in the sand of what we're talking about. And then most people are nice, right? All Canadians are nice. They're going to come back and say, Tom, what are you hoping to get out of this? And then I can say, well, I'm really hoping to talk about my book that just came out. I've got a special welcome page that I made just for your audience. And this is where it's at. And these are the things I'll give, right? Set it up for them. Make it easy for them to give you the interview that you want.
Exactly. You said something at the beginning there that really, that stuck with me, that, it's the host's responsibility to know the book, to bring it up. I think so many guests assume so much responsibility to the host, to carry the interview, to promote that interview afterwards. To be a good guest, not only do you have to show up prepared, but you need to carry some of that responsibility as well. It's equally up to you to have a great conversation, to direct the flow of the conversation, to bring up your stories. It's the host's job to know the equipment to make you feel comfortable, to help direct the conversation, but they don't know you as well as you do, obviously. It's your responsibility to get your message out there. It's also your responsibility afterwards to continue that relationship with the host and to promote that show as well. It's not all going to be on the shoulders of the host. For it to be successful, you need to put in just as much work as well.
Yes. And the thing is that successful, right? It's not just about another interview. It's about getting the results you want from every interview.
Absolutely. And I think one of the great ways to do that too, you want to have your topic in mind, you want to have your calls to action, but you also want to have examples, right? That's going to be part of what's going to communicate the problem, the solution to the listeners. We usually recommend coming into a conversation with a couple of case studies. You want to have, I don't want to call it a fail story, but you want to have an example of a problem that happened when they didn't listen to your advice, when they didn't use your solution. What did that look like for that client, for that customer, And then on the flip side of that, you want to have a success story. You want to know, you want to have a case study that you can show of somebody who came to you with a problem, that they used your product, your solution, and found success in that. So that's also, I think, part of being prepared for an interview, is having those in your pocket as well.
I love how you call it story stacking, right? I think of it as have stories that you can show them what heaven looks like and what hell looks like, right? So this is what happens when people don't go down the right path. They don't work with us, whatever it is. And here is what happens when they do, right? I look back on what I just said there, right? The before, the from, to, right? I did an interview for my book and they didn't even talk about my book. Okay. There's the before, and sort of stacked it in the same way. Well, if you do it this way, work with us, you will get out of those. What are examples like you can think of with that?
Flexibility, I think, and listening to the pros is something that always comes to mind. I think we've seen clients that have come to us and they had a very specific vision, goal in mind. Obviously, we want to work to achieve that, but sometimes the road there doesn't look exactly the way that you planned. Recently, and I won't say any names here, but we had a client that came to us and they had a lot of interviews that we were trying to get for them. And they were very, very honed in on the energy sector. But they did investment too. We used our tools to see, where their audience lied, the shows that they were listening to. And we found so much success in getting them invites from these other shows that were more investment oriented, but they were so focused, so honed in on the energy sector, which, they got a couple, but ultimately the story wasn't there. We can't force something to happen if the hosts aren't interested in that. So I think, this particular person was not willing to listen. And ultimately we had to part ways because there wasn't a way to move forward from there. Right.
And I'll just jump into sometimes they're their own worst enemy on there. Right. I can think of a client that, I had some, words with, right. Of like, trust us on this, right. Because, business coach, right. He talked to business owners about life and life work balance, right. That was his big thing. And that's what he wanted to talk about. And he'd been going from business show to business show, talking about that same, he sounded like every other business coach, right? And we found him a podcast, and it was one of our team members. And I was like, this is genius. And it was called 40 Plus Fitness. And we brought it to him, and he's like, I told you I want to talk on business, right? I want to talk about work-life balance. And we're like, this is your perfect audience, right? People, mostly men, right? That are 40 plus, that their business has excelled, but their health hasn't, right? And I said, this is what you talk about, right? When you talk about it does you no good if you make your first million at 30, if you make your first widow by 40. And Liz, that was one of his best performing podcasts ever, because he was talking to the right audience in a place where he sounded different. And, so it's that sometimes you just have to trust the experts on that. And I know you have a story about on the health and wellness side that really proved this.
I was going to say, and it's again in the wellness over 40 crowd. I won't say any names, but kind of like an AG1 competitor type of client, if you will. And they came to us really, really honed in on the Gen Z millennial type of market. And they were also doing paid ads on those shows. We got them on a couple of big ones. And they just were not seeing the traction. Also, there just wasn't as much interest there, I think, as they were expecting there to be. And so, we brainstormed, we pivoted on the back end. Sometimes you got to try something and ask for forgiveness later. But yeah, we tried the longevity folks, the wellness over 40, and they were eating this stuff up quite literally, because it is a product that you consume. But we were able to get them on those shows, and they listened to us, and they saw where where their audience was, where the drive was, and they were willing to pivot and go on to those shows. And so, we started the campaign in one direction, we steered to the other, and then we started seeing a lot of conversions, a lot of results. And I think, they found where their audience was at the end of the day. And it's funny that they're both like over 40 shows, but yeah.
It's one of those where they came to us like, our audience engages with us, Gen Z on social media. And then they came to us, and I'm like, well, they might engage with you there, but it's the millennials that are actually buying from you on podcasts. So it's like, if you want to optimize, for sales and profits, let's go after these people.
It's like trying to sell wrinkle cream to my nieces, right? Like they don't need it. I'll buy it though.
And with filters, they never will, right? So,
exactly.
Just make sure. And that's why you can get the interview that you want with the people that you want, because ultimately it's the results that we're optimizing for.
Yeah, no, definitely. And we, speaking of filters and everything like that, we know that podcasting is such a better way to deliver that in an authentic way that's going to connect with folks versus an ad or, something on print or something like that.
And let's talk about that a little bit, because even, the assets that you have, are those going to relate to the people there? And I think so many times, once again, it's like, I got invited on this show. Great.
Now what are you going to do with it?
Now what are you going to do with it? You have the opportunity. Now let's get the results from it. And some of that can be, those promotional assets that you've got ready beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. When you when you go on an interview, when you're talking with the host, often, the host wants the interview to succeed as much as you do. So oftentimes they're going to share the raw format with you in advance. There's a lot of, sometimes they will even share their own, ready to post assets. But something that can be equally valuable is for you to do that on the back end and be ready for when the episode goes live to have those pull quotes, those things that you're going to share across social media that you're going to tag the host on. And also if the host sees that you're doing that on your end, that you have that ready, they're going to invite you back. That is going to spread by word of mouth, how prepared you are, how professional you are, how much you're willing to help the interview succeed after the fact. So having those things ready to go is equally just as important. And that includes your dedicated, your vanity landing page with the name of the show where you direct listeners, specifically for that episode. That's something special that you can do. Continuing to promote that after the fact, and then also to continue developing the relationship with the host as well.
I remember when we first started to talk about this and wrote about it in a book, people would say, well, do I have to do all of that? No, you're a grown adult, right? You don't have to do anything. All we're telling you here is this is the recipe for success, right? Do you have to put all the ingredients into a cake? No, right? But if you want the results, if you want that cake to rise, right? Personally, I don't like the taste of, is it baking soda or baking powder? Whatever one causes it to rise. I don't like the taste of that. But I tell you what, if I don't put that half teaspoon or teaspoon in, the cake doesn't turn out. So these things are important, not just, hey, I'm going to show up and talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's a lot, for one person to take on, but there are different resources and tools that you can use at your disposal. We help our clients with a lot of those repurposing assets as well. But I think, you have to seek out where to get those tools, how to develop those assets, because that is ultimately going to be part of the recipe for success.
Yeah. And let's talk about, success, right? What does success look like? What are the metrics that you can say, this was the podcast interview I wanted, and it got me the results that I wanted?
Well, we know that you can use a lot of different metrics. You can use UTMs to see how many visitors you're getting to that specific landing page. That's why welcome pages are so important. Also just tracking qualified leads, the backlink authority. What's the sales pipeline that's happening there? I know you know a lot more about this than I do, Tom, so I'll let you step in.
Well, and I've had a lot of discussions with people much smarter than me about this, right? And one of the things that professional sales always does, professional services, is ask that open-ended question, how'd you find out about us? And I had a conversation with Rand Fishkin, right? It's on a previous episode of the podcast interview marketing show. And he swore that question didn't correlate to the actual results, right? So often people that are in digital marketing will say, are you tracking first touch attribution, meaning where did they first hear about you? Or are you tracking last touch, meaning the last place they found out about you? And that's very important when it comes to high volume transactions. But I don't think it's nearly as important as with professional services and high ticket engagements, right? Because, where's the first time you heard about podcast interview marketing or interview valet? Chances are you're not going to remember the first time. When was the last time? You're probably not going to remember exactly what it was, right? Oh, I saw a LinkedIn post that was this and, all the rest of that. No, ask them, where did you find out about us? What they're going to tell you is what is most memorable, right? And to me, when it's a relationship sale, it's all about what was memorable. And so I think that in a sales pipeline can be very important, right? So prime example here, we use HubSpot. There's a reason that our logo has HubSpot orange, right? They've been a client. My last company was their first e-commerce case study. And when we go through the pipeline record, it will say where they came from, right? And it will say direct traffic. Okay. That was direct traffic to the site. But when we start talking with them and we ask them the question, how did you find out about this? Right? If they say Chat GPT, which, AI is our best referral source now, we change that to it's a referral from AI. Or if it's a direct traffic, but I had just talked with one of our clients and they say, oh, I talked with Kim Daly at a conference and she mentioned you. Well, HubSpot says that's direct traffic, and I guess it is, but that's really a referral. So we've got to go in and change that so that it's indicative of what's really happening, not what just the tokens and the digital algorithms are saying.
Right. And as you mentioned too, that's something that is constantly in flux, right? So you're not going to be able to use the same tools forever. You just mentioned ChatGPT is our biggest referral now, and that was not the case a year ago. So staying on top of that too, being aware of those changes and being able to pivot along with them and using the new tools at your disposal to track those results is very important too.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Sometimes people will give you the wrong information, right? I use ChatGPT now almost as a generic thing like Google or Kleenex. Well, how'd you find out about it? I asked ChatGPT. Well, I actually used Claude to do it, right? Or I used Grok,
or Gemini,
something like that. But Gemini, whatever it is, I used one of those, right? Or if somebody says, this was one, Jamie Masters told me about you. Oh, okay. Well, how do you know Jamie, right? Do you live in Austin too? Well, no, I listened to her podcast. Oh, okay. Well, that's great. So I'll attribute that to a podcast, not a personal referral, even though they looked at as, hey, that was a personal referral. At the end of the day, I just want to be able to back into it of what interview was it that drove that traffic. And that's why also it's important to attribute that traffic and have different topics, right? You talked about before about, being very specific on the topic. I hear too many people that will say, oh, I was on 50 podcasts. I did 50 podcasts. And you listen to it and it's like, well, you did one interview
across 50 podcasts.
You just did it 50 places. And it sounds silly, but it's like if I said I wrote 50 blogs last year or I posted 50 blogs last year and they were all the same blog, that would seem silly, but yet so many people are doing it with podcast interviews.
Yeah, that's also, I think, part of what's we were talking about before about showing up prepared is knowing how you can adjust your story specifically for the messaging of that show and for those listeners. You want to be able to, obviously you have your goal in mind, you have the results that you want to see, but not every problem that the listeners are going to experience is going to be the same one, right? So you want to be able to tailor your message, to tailor your stories, that arc, if you will, to match the style of the show and to match what the listeners are expecting from that show versus just shoehorning your same story in there every time. Because also too, listeners aren't going to follow you across shows if you're just saying the same thing every single time, right? They're going to listen to one interview. They're going to listen to the second one and be like, oh, I've heard this before. I don't need to listen to the third one. If you pop up on another show that they listen to, they might even skip it because they already know what you're going to say.
Or even they've got 30 minutes of content, right? Dave Ramsey, I really respect what he does, but if you've listened to a month's worth of Dave Ramsey, you know how he will answer every question. There's nothing new there. There's nothing interesting. There's nothing remarkable, right? He's going to talk about the 6 baby steps every time. And when you get to sharing something, listening to it, you stop listening to it. And with AI, it stops indexing it after a while, right? They'll think, well, Tom knows 30 minutes of content and every podcast he talks about the same stuff.
And not just that, but ultimately it's going to hurt your repurposing content as well and your continued promotion. We We always say you can get a month's worth of content from one interview. But if it's the same interview that every single time, then it's still just going to be that 1 month of content. If you're posting the same thing on social media over and over again, people are going to get sick of it and they're going to unfollow you. I know that for a fact.
As we were preparing for this, I said, I want to save this one for the last, but I think this could be the most important one. And you brought this, and it's so true, and it aligns with what podcasting is and who we are, right? We always talk about relationships are the ultimate currency. So what's that last piece of advice you'd have someone to get the results and the interview that they want?
I think one of the reasons that people choose podcasting to begin with is they want that borrowed trust from the host, right? That's, as you mentioned, somebody heard you from a host like that. It's a referral, but ultimately it's from the podcast. It's from that borrowed trust because they trusted this person that gave them your name. And so you want to be able to, first of all, appreciate that. And to continue to build that relationship and reciprocate that, because ultimately, as you mentioned, that if you give the right impression, if you promote the show, if you nurture the results of the interview and your results and your relationship with the host, that's going to mean more to them. And they're going to not only continue to invite you back, they might recommend you for other shows. They'll recommend them, to people at a conference or an event. So it's not just about sucking up and putting up a good face and showing up to the interview and then, ignoring everything after the fact. It's to, you want to continue to be that genuine, thoughtful person that got invited to the show to begin with. We always recommend, even a handwritten thank you card can go a long way. You don't have to do that now. You can send an email, but it's important to thank the host, to show that appreciation. And, on your end too, you can refer the host if they, have services or something like that, refer them to the people that It's a two-way street.
Yeah. It's like there's two ways it's going to go. The podcast is going to be the start of a great relationship if you nourish it. And if you ghost them afterwards, it's going to feel like an icky one night stand, right? And they'll remember that too. The category pirates call it relationship capital. So just remember, at every podcast, you're either building or destroying that relationship capital.
You just reminded me of one of my all-time favorite quotes from Tracy Jordan from 30 Rock. And he says, I don't believe in two-way streets, not in my relationships and not while driving. I do believe in one-way streets while driving. That would get me in a lot of trouble. But the relationships part is very true.
And too many people drive and podcast guest like all that exists is their one-way street. Well, Liz, you gave me a great idea for a meme. You gave me great ideas on how to make sure that we're helping people get the interviews they want, right? What's ordinary to you is amazing to others. And I appreciate you sharing it with the clients that you work with and also with the whole audience here too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, ultimately, it's a two-part process. It's about finding the right platform, the right interview, and then being able to deliver on that to see the results you want. So that's it. That's my main takeaway, my flagship topic right there. Thanks again, Tom, for having me. It's always a pleasure. I love being on PIMS.
So let's be honest. Are you taking the interview that's handed to you? Or are you showing up prepared to get the one that you really want? Today, Liz and I laid out exactly how to take control, to define your flagship topic, to set clear calls to action, to prep the host and use that green room time very wisely. And finally, to bring the right stories to drive results. It's not about being scripted. It's about being strategic. Remember, the host is not responsible for your results. You are. The best guests take the lead before the interview even starts. They don't show up hoping it goes well. They shape the conversation so they can ensure it goes well. So here's your next step. Before your next interview, ask yourself, what do I want from this? Then reverse engineer every step to make it happen. That's how you stop doing interviews and start doing business.